Welcome to the Capstone Conversation, where you learn about what's happening in the greater East Bay. I am your host, Jared Ash. Today, we are going to look at public safety, and I am joined by Chief of Police Jamie Knox from the city of Walnut Creek. Thanks, Chief, for being here today. I appreciate this.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Tell us a little bit more about your background and what brought you to Walnut Creek. Let's start there.
I started my law enforcement career technically, about 33 years ago. 30 years ago as a full-time paid member of law enforcement. I started my career in the city that I grew up in, which is Roseville, California. And shortly after that, I got hired I started as a dispatcher, a 911 operator. But after about a year, I realized I really wanted to be out in the field and I didn't want to be cooped up in front of a console. But it was a good experience. And I took a job with the city of Rockland, which is a sister city of Roseville in Placer County, as a police officer. And I was there for about 19 years. I made my way through the ranks and I worked pretty much every assignment under the sun, from patrol to I was a canine handler, I was a field training officer, I was on the bicycle team, I was on SWAT, I worked detectives, I rose through the ranks, a corporal, then sergeant. I worked internal affairs for a couple of years. I was our accreditation manager, worked my way up to the rank of lieutenant, where I oversaw quite a few different things, mainly in patrol. We had a regional EOD team, which is an emergency ordnance disposal, or a bomb team, and that was a partnership with the city of Roseville. I was the EOD commander and then also oversaw our SWAT team. We also had a regional SWAT team with Roseville. And in 2015, I was recruited to go to the city of Novato in Marin County, which was just quite a departure from what I was used to, but they were looking for a captain and it just made sense to start a new chapter and try something different. I was with the city of Novato for a couple of years, oversaw their administrative services division. That's everything behind the scenes, right? It's everything not patrol, dispatch, records, property and evidence, budget, personnel, training, hiring, all of those things, internal affairs. And then after a couple of years of doing that, I was recruited to make a lateral move across the bay, which is what brought me to the East Bay with the city of San Leandro. I was a captain there for about 4.5 years. I oversaw both divisions. The first part was the administrative division, and then the second part was their operations division. And my chief's biological clock was ticking. I thought, if I'm going to be a chief of police somewhere, I wanted to be part of the movement to create policing into a professional and noble entity again, because in the eyes of the public, we had faltered over the years. And we had quite a few things that happened in history over the last few decades. I remember when I was a cadet paying attention to the Rodney King case and the beating of Rodney King and how that affected that community, and all of the things that happened after that really kept giving the public a voice that they really didn't have. And of course, when the cell phone came out and everybody had a camera, it really exposed policing for what it was. And sometimes it was really great, and sometimes it was not so great. That's a long way of saying I wanted to be part of making history and creating this profession in the eyes of the public. I always say that we police in the manner that our public or our citizens expect us to police. And we're very lucky and fortunate in Walnut Creek because there's a very long tradition of professional policing here. But every police department had to make adjustments and to really look inward at their culture and how they were connecting with the community. For whatever reason, when it comes to, and I know we want to talk about technology today, but a lot of what the private sector has as far as like data points and feedback, and before social media and before a lot of the technological advances and smarter people in law enforcement now to analyze data, we really didn't have a strong mechanism to figure out how well we were doing other than maybe crime that we reported to the FBI. There wasn't a lot of push to or funding to do things like citizen surveys, and we didn't have social media platforms where citizens could comment and share their views. You had a city council meeting, and depending on how accessible the police department was, dictated how knowledgeable a chief of police was on what public sentiment was related to policing. And how we police in Walnut Creek might be a little bit different on how they might police somewhere else in the state of California, up north, or maybe in LA, or maybe even across the country. Part of that's based on culture. It's not to say that one way is better than the other. But again, I go back to the true spirit of community policing is to make sure that you are in tune with your community's values, and outside of, is it legal, ethical, moral, and all of those things, and are you within department policy, are you really doing your best to capture exactly what your community needs and expects of their police department, from both a crime fighting component and also just a social justice and empathetic approach to policing. What brought me to Walnut Creek is, as a young man, I had traveled to Walnut Creek a couple of times. I always noted that it was a very similar city to what I grew up in policing. It's sort of a bedroom community, but it was much more than that. It was a destination city with a lot of great restaurants. Their downtown, I always thought, was very interesting. I was always enamored by how many great car dealerships were here. When I started thinking about becoming a chief, this was the first place I thought of. I guess I just got lucky where it opened at the right time, and I was looking at the right time, and the rest is history, and that's how I got here.
One thing I want to pick up on what you said is I have a former colleague that was a retired chief of the police. And I was asking him after the George Floyd thing, and there was a number of other cases around the same time. And I was asking, has policing really changed? Has racism, have these beatings become more common, or were they always there? And he said, most of the time they were always there. We just didn't have video cameras in the public's pocket to watch everything. And just, I picked that up because you talked about people having cell phones and cameras and how that's changed. Can you just add some more thoughts onto how you've seen police change over your 30-year history?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And you look at body-worn cameras and that technology and what it's done for police. And there's a mixed bag of studies out there right now, but everything that I've seen points to not only better accountability, but better behavior by both police officers and by the public. Because I think our number of citizen complaints have gone down. Is that because officers are more professional, or is that because the public is thinking twice before they resist an officer or do something that's inappropriate, or try to bait an officer into doing something and then turning around and filing a complaint? That's a big fear of police when body cameras first came out. Is every little thing I do going to be scrutinized, and am I going to get in trouble for every little thing? Because at the end of the day, you are dealing with people on their worst day. Oftentimes they're not happy to see us. And sometimes we have to take people into custody and we have to hold them accountable for what they do. And sometimes people go sideways and they fight with us. The data that I have, we're behind the curve still in policing when it comes to really solid quantitative and qualitative data around behavior of both suspects and maybe even police officers. But with body-worn camera footage, there's this vast technology that's being developed right now, much of it tied to AI, where it could actually not only analyze speech and tone of speech, but also body language. And we did a pilot program that we worked on. I worked with researchers at Stanford when I worked at San Leandro. And we got consent from our police officers union and our staff to participate in a study. And they watched body-worn camera footage or listened to a dialogue between an officer and a suspect or read a transcript of such. And then they were asked a series of questions. Really what we were looking for is, what did the officers think of the language that was used, the word choice, the tone, and everything related to maybe something like a simple car stop. And we digested all of that information. And we found some really interesting things. We found that the older officers, the more senior officers, the more tenured officers, if you will, had a much greater connection to community policing and the community they served than the younger, less experienced officers, which was surprising because everybody was talking about, hey, this next generation of officers, they're going to police different, they're more educated, they're more in touch with social justice causes and more aware of maybe some of the challenges that we've had in policing in the past. We learned a great deal during that. And I've always considered myself an eternal learner when it comes to policing. But if you take a step back and just look at everything that's happened in this country, there's been a couple of major cases that were catalysts for reform in police. And the biggest one, technology-wise, was certainly the camera. Because what happened during the Rodney King case, would that have happened if somebody were not in the shadows with a video camera? I don't know. But then there was this long lull and everything seemed fine. And then all of a sudden, there were some other cases. Ferguson, Missouri, Michael Brown, that was a big one. And the issue was much deeper than just an issue with race. It was an issue that bled into local government and politics, probably. St. Louis County, Missouri is a county about anywhere from 150 to 200 square miles. St. Louis, Missouri has 85. That's a lot. How do those cities get their revenue? They were over policing and writing traffic citations. They would literally hold court, if I remember correctly, in judges' living rooms. They would hold traffic court. If you're a blue-collar worker and you get a traffic citation and you don't have the money to pay it, you can't afford it, and then you get pulled over again, your car gets impounded or you get arrested because you haven't paid your fines, it's just this vicious cycle. All of those things were occurring and had been occurring for years and years. And then now everybody has a cell phone. Michael Brown was shot and killed, but they had more of an issue with leaving his body in the street for whatever it amounted to, 6 hours.
Yeah.
And there just wasn't a lot of empathy there. I was in the FBI National Academy in Quantico, Virginia for 3 months studying I was a lieutenant law enforcement. You'd go study for 3 months. But while I was there, one of the classes I signed up for was a media class, and we studied everything related to media and the police. When Ferguson erupted, I was in my class, and for 3 months, we studied everything that happened. We studied what was going on social media. We studied what the chief said, what the chief didn't said, how they said it, what the response was, all of the outside agencies, the protesting and rioting. And it was really an interesting lens to look through for 3 months to really study what went wrong and what potentially led up to it. We didn't know at the time. We were just looking at the aftermath and having really good conversations on what we could do better as a policing entity. We had quite a few in our own backyard. We're so densely populated in the Bay Area. We had Mario Woods and Oscar Grant and Stephen Taylor and San Leandro and Miles Hall right here in Walnut Creek. All of those things gave us pause and really challenged us to look at the way we police and make adjustments where we could. Now, are we exactly where we need to be as a profession in this country? Probably not. I'd like to think that we've made some serious reform and strides to be what we should be. But at the end of the day, you need to understand that behind every badge is a human being with emotions and feelings. And we don't hire robots. We hire people. We try to find the right balance of education, physical fitness, mental preparedness, resiliency. Some of the things that we ask these men and women to do on a daily basis, the general public, just 99% of the public probably are not equipped to do it. It's really hard to find that 1%, and I'm just using that number anecdotally, but that can really do this job. But for example, in 2024, we had somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 people apply to be police officers. and we ended up hiring less than 10. And that's so 400 people really wanted to do that job, but here, at least, we ended up hiring less than 10. Our standards are very high, but we do try to find the right balance of people that can do this job.
Let's talk about the workforce, because everywhere you go in the Bay Area, and it seems like it's getting a little better, we hear issues that there's not enough police officers to fill the jobs. You had 400 applicants. That seems you had your pick of the top ones. Did the other 390 go to other cities? Is it just that Walnut Creek is so attractive as a destination versus Oakland or BART? Or talk a little bit about the police shortage in your view.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. And it's a simple question, but I'm going to give you a very complicated answer. I've been a manager in policing for about 15 years, a supervisor for over 20, but have had some involvement in hiring for quite some time and been a hiring manager or as an executive for 10 years. 10, 15, 20 years ago, there were 1,000 people in line to be a police officer in any given city around here. And now we're just not seeing that. 400, in my opinion, is not a large number. Those numbers were typically higher in previous years. The only reason that number is what it is, I believe, we contracted with a third party to help us with our recruiting effort a couple of years ago. And so this company did a huge marketing campaign. We pay for advertising. We advertised on streaming services such as Hulu, targeted marketing through social media platforms. That's why we got some of the people to apply. I think that number would have been lower. One, the labor market is really tough right now, especially in the Bay Area. The Bay Area is the hub of this country when it comes to tech, right? Now they're even saying that when it comes to AI, San Francisco is basically where it's at. You're seeing a lot of these startup companies really diving into AI, which is the wave of the future for a lot of different companies. And I think law enforcement can harness some of that as well. That's part of the issue is why would I go become a police officer when I could go work in tech and make the same amount of money with no risk to my life or more? That's one element. The other element is just public sentiment. We're still reeling from what happened with the murder of George Floyd and public sentiment. And when they think of one of us, they think of all of us. They see the word police, that's all they see. That's my challenge to my staff is, hey, you have to show the human side of you and prove to this community that you are more than just the word police, that you are more than just the badge or the patch on your shoulder. And that's a hard thing to do. And like I mentioned, we had our own challenges here. Even though that sentiment, I think, is shifting, it's shifting at a kind of a slower pace. We're not seeing the same types of candidates apply. And matter of fact, just this past year alone, the amount of people we would wash out during the application process has probably tripled. And like, they don't even make it past the captain's interview, where the captains vet all of the candidates before we send them to background. That's a challenge too, because we're trying to be a little bit more open to what candidates we would consider. In the old days, if you had tried marijuana once, you were not getting hired as a police officer. Now we can't even ask that question. We don't even ask people, have you ever used marijuana? One sense that might be helpful. We've done some things locally to relax some policies, such as our tattoo policy. So you can have tattoos that show on your arms now. But that was, a lot of people were getting tattoos, and some police departments, if you have visible tattoos, they won't hire you, or you have to have them covered while on duty. There's all of these different factors that come into play. I think the big ones, it's expensive to live in the Bay Area. If you took the median home price and compared it to the salary, it's disproportionate when you look at certain cities in the Bay Area. We only have a handful of people who actually live here. A majority of our police officers are commuting from outside of the city. In fact, more than half have a 30-mile commute or more, just because it's cheaper to live on the outskirts of the county or even in another county and drive in. Now, we do have a 3-day work week that we offer, a 12-hour schedule, 12 and a half hour. That's attractive to people, and that helps get people in the door because they think, okay, 4 days off, that's nice. But there's other things that happen during those 4 days off. You can get called into work because of a staffing shortage. You might have to go to court and testify. The trial could go on for a couple of days. There's other things to consider. Public sentiment is another. We're not seeing female applicants like we used to, and we are adopters of 30 by 30, which is to try to get 30% of our sworn ranks female by 2030. That's our goal. That's why representation is so important, and it's important for a little girl to see a female police officer in a patrol car or wearing that uniform. They think, oh, I could do that, and that's a noble profession. I want to do that one day. What we saw 4 years ago, though, was the opposite sentiment, where family members were telling their children and their loved ones, don't go into policing. It's no longer a noble profession, and society doesn't like you right now, and they're only going to see the word police. That's challenging, too. A variety of factors, for sure, but obviously having competitive pay and good benefits is helpful. I think policing culture is huge. What I hear from a lot of people that I hire, I interview everybody that I hire, and they all, not to make a generalization, but practically all of them mention something about Walnut Creek in the community, in the culture, in the city, a very inclusive city, the branding that we have here, the equipment that we have, the nice patrol cars that we have. They go on ride-alongs with our officers and maybe another agency. And if they've done that, if they've ridden along somewhere else in here, they always say when they rode with a Walnut Creek officer, they just thought the culture was different. They saw themselves as fitting in here. It seemed to be a healthy culture, not a traditional policing culture that they had in their mind if they weren't familiar. The other thing I'll say is we used to attract a lot of lateral applicants. I think a lot of agencies did. What's going on right now is a lot of people who bought their homes several years ago got a really good interest rate. The interest rates have now gone up, and there's a lot of uncertainty, not only politically in Washington right now, but also with the economy and the market, where some cities, we have our minor financial issues here that we're working through, but some cities in the Bay Area are having some real financial problems, and it's causing them to tighten the budget, sometimes make cuts. Some cities are downsizing their police departments. Our council has made the decision not to do that, and we figured out our budget another way. That's something that might weigh on a potential lateral officer's mind. If I'm going to make a lateral move and sell my house, I have to sell my house where I have a great interest rate only to go buy another house, a similar house, or pay more money to have a higher interest rate, potentially double my mortgage. I don't want to do that. Or if there's financial problems in the city, if I go over there, I have the lowest number of seniority. If layoffs were to happen, who's the first to be laid off? It's the people with less seniority. Yeah. That's why we're not really seeing the same number of lateral applicants that we have had in the past. I think we had a really good run for about a 3-year stretch, and now we've seen it really drop off. What we're focused on right now is just hiring applicants who are new to the profession. And we've had some really good success stories, but boy, it takes a long time to get an officer through training. 6 months for the police academy, now you're at a year, and then 6 months for field training for someone with no experience. That's 18 months. And not everybody makes it. We have a very good track record here. I would say we're probably about 80% of people who go through field training here make it, because we vet them that well, and the police academies are really good, great that we use, and not everybody makes it through the academy. And that's what we want. If they don't, the academy staff and the learning domains and how they test and grade everything, if the system is done the right way, it's really going to weed those candidates out that really can't do the job. But by the time they come to us, I'm very confident in the academies we use that they have a really good shot of making it through their field training program. I think that's important for the public to know. I think it's a misconception that police officers are not well trained. And not to say that this job's easy. It's not by any stretch of the imagination, but that's a lot of training. It's a year of training on the job, and it's very rigorous. And you have to really go back to the people that we hire and how we vet our candidates and backgrounds. Now, practically everybody's going to need a degree of some kind in California. Once the college system figures out what this curriculum is going to be, you're going to see much more educated police officers. About over 75% of my staff have a 4-year degree or higher. We have a very educated police force, and studies have shown that officers with a 4-year degree are generally using less force. They have fewer complaints.
Interesting. Okay, let's talk about every city's a little different, no matter where you are in the Bay Area. Walnut Creek has a lot of retail and it's a hub of restaurants. Much to do last year, Prop 36 passing, changing the criminal process and the penalties for people involved in retail theft, among other things. How is that changing what you do? And have you started to see impacts of that?
That's a great question. Going back to the pandemic and everything that was going on in this country, especially related to police, there was also a big change, a shift in public sentiment when it came to petty crimes. It was like waking up one day and suddenly the public didn't seem so concerned about people who were stealing. And that bled into companies making corporate policies that didn't really support holding thieves accountable, but made it difficult to do our job. The fallout from that was these larger companies that could really absorb those losses. The suspects would not only victimize them, but because no one was calling the police and people were turning the other way or afraid to get involved because it's a petty crime and we don't want a police confrontation in our store and we don't want to be on the 6 o'clock news and see something like George Floyd happen ever again. And I get that. But the fallout from that was these same people would go to smaller stores and victimize smaller stores, for lack of a better term, a mom and pop shop, if you will, that could not absorb the loss the same way that a large corporation could. When I took over this department, we had a real problem of reporting crime here, and a lot of people were not calling us. And that's why our crime of shoplifting has been coming up so much. We launched a campaign where I personally walked a footbeat and went downtown and met with business owners and implored managers of some of these corporate stores to push back on their corporate policies and to call us. There's some stores, their policy was you will not call the police if somebody steals something, and they would have big smash and grab type thefts. They were to create an inventory list of what was taken and call corporate first, and corporate would give them the green light and then they would call us. Now we're just a report taker at that point, if not an investigator, if we didn't have any evidence to go on. But if they called us during the fact, that usually we can get good witness statements, we can get a good description, we can pull our license plate readers and figure out maybe what direction they were going based on that information. Following up is much easier when they report it immediately. And then some places just weren't reporting it at all. In this county, as far as property crime goes, per capita, we're not the highest, but we're darn close. And you're right, it's because we have such a huge retail draw here.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, a lot of people from larger cities, a city with great shopping like San Francisco, they were coming here to Walnut Creek to shop because they felt safer, which is great. There's a lot of retail traffic, and it's a big part of this economy. But with that comes crime. We have 2 freeways that intersect in the city. We also have public transit with a BART station. We have a lot of issues related to BART. The new fare gates, now I haven't personally seen them yet, but my understanding is the new fare gates are in place. So we're hoping that might help with some of the fare evasion that goes on. But BART's been a great partner to us. We work closely with their police department. They don't just kick people off of the train and so that another city has to deal with that issue. They were very measured in how they handled fare evasion, which I really appreciate. But hopefully with just tightening down who is riding the trains, because we had so much regional crime when it came to shoplifting, it was like a revolving door. And without the laws to back it up, you mentioned recent legislation, Prop 36. I know a city that arrested somebody 12 times in 1 month for essentially the same types of crime, and they were still out. Just because they were released on a citation each time because there wasn't a bookable offense or the court system was so slow to catch up and issue a warrant for this person's arrest, there was really no teeth. So with Prop 36 passing, they brought back some of what we lost before with some of the legislative reforms that have occurred over the past 15 years with AB 109. That was probably one of the big ones. And now, if you are arrested, you have 2 priors for a petty theft, you can be booked. Where before this, all of the prison reform and legislation that was passed to try to alleviate some of the overcrowding of the jails and to address some of the over-policing when it came to petty drug offenses and things like that, and petty shoplifting. Prior to all of that, if you were arrested for petty theft and you had 1 prior where you served at least 1 day in jail, you could have been booked for a felony. And that went away. And that's why we saw some of the surge in retail crime that we did. And then organized retail theft became a problem, especially in the Bay Area and down in Southern California, because there was a huge underground market for designer clothing and bags and jewelry where you could go steal it and sell it for half of what you would pay new. We worked really hard targeting fences, as we call it in the business, these people who were buying in large quantities the stolen goods only to resell them. But it's still early to tell on what the impact will be. We're really relying on, obviously, the district attorney's office and elected judges to be good partners and to identify these bad actors and the people that are a menace to society and who really should be behind bars until at least they can go through the judicial process and not necessarily just issued a citation and released because a judge or somebody feels that it doesn't really warrant keeping them in custody when they're victimizing stores and citizens over and over. Seems promising, but it might be a little too early to tell. Anecdotally, we're a little behind. We always get our data maybe 6 weeks after because we have to process everything for the month. And when we report all of our crime stats to DOJ, by that time, it's 6 weeks behind. We look at this data constantly, at least my staff does, and we promulgate this information out throughout the ranks, and we do a lot of directed enforcement patrols, and we were running some special undercover operations, doing these blitzes focused on retail crime and making sure that people understood that some areas were a little too hot. We didn't want them there. Broadway Plaza is one of them. Target's one of them, because there's just a lot of retail theft.
Let's talk about technology in policing. How has it changed? What are some of the cool toys that you guys have out there now? We've heard about drones, AI, robots. What are you using in Walnut Creek and what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I look at technology through a couple of different lenses. One, can it help us do our job better? 2, can we be more accurate with what we do? Is there some sort of staff efficiency that it can solve for us? And can it make us safer? So there's some technology that's been around for a while, such as bomb robots. We have the county's only bomb team, the Walnut Creek Bomb Squad. Even though bomb robots have been around for a while, they are getting smaller. They're getting easier to remote control, and they're much more tactile too. You can do a lot more things with some of these smaller robots with more features, and that always leads to a safer outcome where we don't have to have an operator so close to a device. We could take a bomb robot up to inspect it, to manipulate it if needed, to take an x-ray, or to render it inert by setting a charge and disrupting the device. So definitely robots are helpful there. Drones have been a total game changer for a couple of reasons. Initially, they were only used for wide area searches when the technology first came out. It was relatively limited. The video quality wasn't great. The battery life wasn't great. Now there's even better technology with forward-looking infrared. We have a tether drone that we use that can, once we send it up, we don't have to do a battery change. It can stay up. Now you're limited to be stationary in a general area, but it's very helpful for special events or if we're doing a targeted enforcement or an undercover operation relative to retail theft or something like that. And now the drones are so small that you can actually fly them into homes, which is much safer than sending a police officer inside or an operator if you know that it's a dangerous situation. We can communicate with suspects inside that. You can get a much better picture of what the interior layout looks like, or locate a potential suspect that might be barricaded. So that brings that safety component. We also use drones for missing people, though. We can use it to get aerial photographs of a traffic accident scene or a crime scene. There's multiple uses. I think one of the biggest are body cameras. I think that's almost ubiquitous now, at least in California. Just about every agency is using them.
Most big cities are now.
And then some counties, particularly in the Bay Area and probably in Los Angeles as well, if you don't have body cam footage, if it's an officer initiated crime, like you did a traffic stop and you had probable cause to search the vehicle and you found contraband or something, and so the case goes to court and you don't have body cam footage, it becomes an officer's word against the suspects. That's how some district attorneys will look at that. Now, when I started policing, that's all we had. We didn't have any body camera.
Right.
Digital, we call them digital patrollers, or cameras inside the police cruiser, was still relatively new technology. In fact, when I first started, it was a VHS tape that you had in the trunk of the car. I'm dating myself right now, but so the body-worn cameras have been a game changer, like I mentioned before, not only for police accountability, but for protecting our officers against frivolous complaints, false complaints. And then now there's technology built in to where if an officer draws their taser, the camera will come on. If they activate their light bar in the patrol car, the camera will come on. We can live stream the cameras, and there's some other technology built in, which is very helpful. I think our license plate reader cameras have been very helpful in solving crime because it at least puts a vehicle at a place. And even if sometimes the criminals think they can outsmart us and they will steal license plates, and we call it cold plating, where they steal someone else's license plates and put it on a stolen vehicle, we will not get an alert that vehicle's stolen. And it's really up to the owner of the other car. Once they figure out their plate's been stolen, they have to report that plate stolen, but that could be a week before they notice it. And they might take just a rear plate and maybe put some fake tags or steal tags from another plate. They try to be clever and circumvent the system, but there's still a plate on the car. And if you don't have plates on your car, you're probably going to get pulled over sooner than later. So we can at least put a car and track where it's going. And that's a very powerful investigative lead. The biggest, I think, game changer in policing today and moving forward is going to be artificial intelligence. We're looking at AI for report writing right now. Paperwork is probably the biggest time suck when it comes to policing, because if you make an arrest or you're investigating a certain type of crime, depending on the crime, there's a lot of paperwork involved. Forms, with the technology that's out there, it can consume your body-worn camera. It can consume and transcribe all of the dialogue that occurred. It can take all of your computer-aided dispatch information, what time you were dispatched, what time the call came in, what the caller said, what time you arrived, all of the things that happened, and it can consume all of that and write a report for you. And then now you become an editor. I think it would probably save 75% of an officer's time just by doing that. Now, we've used technology.
And that's something that's currently in place?
Yes. And it's relatively new. We're developing, the district attorney was working on a countywide policy for best practice on the use of artificial intelligence. That is almost to a fully baked, if not a fully baked stage, where all of us can have that policy, and the district attorney knows that this technology is out there and they're accepting of that. There's some disclaimers that you need to have and training that needs to occur. We haven't purchased anything yet. We're just exploring that technology and how it might work for us. You might have a business call, and if the dispatchers are tied up on the phone, AI can basically figure out what you need very quickly. And if it's not an emergency, they can either point you in the right direction, they can transfer the call, they can answer any questions that you have. Maybe it's your car was towed and you need to figure out how to get a tow release. The AI can actually explain that for you, where
Right.
you need to talk to somebody. Real-time transcription, real-time foreign language transcription, where you no longer need to use a language line, but it transcribes it on a heads-up display for the dispatcher real time. and then real-time transcription of police radio traffic, because sometimes the computer can pick up what the human ear can't. Granted, there's always caveats to some of this technology. You have to be careful and implement it in the right way. But that part of it, the dispatch part of it, is relatively new, but the technology is evolving so quickly, it's going to allow us to do our job much more.
So a lot of that AI is all brand new, and there's a ton of companies popping up in the space. How do some of those companies get before the decision makers at police departments? How do you vet it? Give me
Yes.
some.
We have a lot of thought leaders, but when you're in a ranking position where you're managing a unit or a division and you become a decision maker, we expect everybody to be educated on what technology is out there. We do send people to training and conferences that have trade shows. Annually, California Police Chiefs Association has an annual conference that has a really good trade show, which includes technology, but now they also sponsor a technology-only conference. One of the last conferences we had, we sent some of our IT folks and our police staff to it. And then the International Association of Chiefs of Police also has an annual conference in addition to a technology conference. So there's multiple opportunities if you're a thought leader in law enforcement for you to go to these conferences, and you go to the trade show and you can see what technology is out there. You can ask questions, you can manipulate it, you can see it in action. And the idea is that you're knowledgeable enough to know what is available to you. And of course, we're utilizing public funds. We have a purchasing policy in place, and depending on the cost, we would typically, if it's a large cost and was over the threshold of our purchasing policy, maybe it needed to go to council, for example, then you could either do what's known as a sole source. So, hey, this is the only company with this technology, or you would do an RFP and get some bids from a few different vendors and then vet them based on what your needs are. But that's generally how it works.
And I know we're running out of time. 30 seconds on e-bikes.
They're very dangerous, and you should be very careful if you're going to be in the market to acquire an e-bike. Enforcement is something that's on our radar. I know the public is really wanting us to make sure we educate the public, but also enforce traffic laws. It's certainly one of our city council's priorities is traffic safety. We have a lot of pedestrian traffic in town, but it is exciting for people to not be in a vehicle and to have one of these e-bikes that can help them get from point A to point B. You just have to be very careful depending on what class of e-bike you have. They can go really fast. 28 miles per hour on a bicycle is not the same as being on a motorcycle, because motorcycle has a lot more mass to it and shocks and things like that are going to help absorb some impact if you do get into trouble, you get into a collision. But yeah, and the e-bikes they're smaller, they're harder to see. I would tell the public is wear a helmet no matter what, wear bright colored clothing no matter what, obey the rules of the road, understand if there's any local ordinances. We have a local ordinances that says you can't have a bicycle you can't be riding it on a sidewalk. Stick to bicycle lanes, stick to the flow of traffic, don't blow through red lights, look for pedestrians, stop signs, and everybody will be safer.
Okay. And since I'm getting free advice here, I'm asking totally for a friend. If I were to be speeding and a cop were chasing me in another city and I hit the Walnut Creek boundary, let's say from Concord or Pittsburgh or something, do they have to stop at the boundary, or they could keep coming to get me?
Yeah. So even if they didn't start the pursuit there, a peace officer, a sheriff's deputy, full-time sheriff's deputy, or full-time peace officer in the state of California, no matter what city or county you were sworn in or jurisdiction, you have jurisdiction, legal jurisdiction in the entire state. So if the violation occurred, let's say an officer was in their patrol car, and let's say they're a canine officer, they're going out of the area for training, and they pulled a car over because of some egregious violation, they can issue that person a citation or have a local entity come over like CHP or the local police department and issue them a citation on their behalf and go to court and testify if need be. And they have their peace officer powers run through the entire state of California. Sorry.
Great way to end it. Chief Jamie Knox from Walnut Creek Police. I really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Wait, don't leave yet. Hit subscribe. Make sure you get the weekly updates. We have a new episode every Wednesday for stuff happening in the East Bay. In the meantime, follow me on LinkedIn, Jared Ash, or check out our firm where we have a weekly newsletter and blog at Capstone Government Affairs on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today on the Capstone Conversation.